Beth. So we had a lot of questions from our last session, and let's look at some of those. So one was somebody asked, what's a realistic way to set people up for a meeting so they actually show up ready to engage? And does it even work if your team isn't already in the habit of preparing?
Well, the game is won or lost with a good desired outcome, Beth. Like that is where, if you don't have a good desired outcome, you might as well not meet. And even if you're not used to preparing, the one thing you could do is at the start of the meeting, just say, hey, what do we want to make sure we leave with today? Now, that will not get the right people in the room, but it will set the right direction once people are in the room. So if you have a good desired outcome the week before or the day before, that'll then maybe get them in the room. It can't be something general. It has to be very specific.
And say something about the right people. What do you mean?
Well, if you have a very specific desired outcome, like by the end of this meeting, we'll have an understanding of the budget shortfall. So you can make functional cuts, recommendations for cuts in your functional area. That's going to get people raising their hand and go, oh yeah, I want to be there. Because I want to know how much, should I make cuts? How much? I want to have a voice in recommending where the cuts would come from. So I think that gets butts in the seat.
So you're really talking about it has to be relevant to people. Like it just made me think of somebody that was talking about they do these weekly meetings and cover a bunch of stuff, and a lot of it isn't relevant to everyone. And so then they talked about people kind of check out, or they'll be doing something else because they're talking about something that isn't what they're involved in, and then they have to get them back. And so it's the right people, but making sure that meeting is all for the right people then. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think you're talking about like some staff meetings.
Yeah.
They're terrible. The status meetings, sometimes they're just terrible because, the extrovert starts talking at the beginning and just burns calories for like 20 minutes. And then the introvert who's sitting at the end of the queue is, there with the most important thing, but never gets the word in, never gets their word in. So even starting a meeting like that, a status meeting, breathing the breath of life into those is about, saying at the beginning, here are the criteria that we're going to use to decide what we're going to talk about today. And often it has relevance to everybody. It's important in terms of dependencies of how our initiative is progressing. So what are the key milestones that might be missed? What are the dependencies that are important for you to know about because downstream they're going to affect you? Those are the things I'm thinking about to getting people engaged and to get more interesting conversations going in those status or check-in meetings.
Well, and I like what you just said there because I think people do round robins in
Yeah,
meetings and they don't know what to share.
that's
So,
right.
and I don't want to sit there with nothing to share. So if I don't know what to share, and it's like, well, Tuesday our group. So what you're talking about is we need to identify what do we want to hear from people about the round robin. So part of it is you said like what's going on that's going to impact other people or change a timeline, what issues or problems we're facing and who else needs to be involved in it. So something really targeted for that
That's
round
right.
robin. Yeah.
Yeah, people end up wanting to go because they need to go. They want to know. They want to know
Yeah.
because they want to report so that they don't hit some trouble downstream.
Yeah.
So that gets them out of their, that gets them engaged in the room.
Well, that also makes me think about what you said with a good desired outcome that we're actually accomplishing things. So I go to your meetings because they're good meetings, because things happen, because I'm not just sitting there. Um, and I think the better our meetings are run and that things come out of them, the more people are willing to prepare. Right. So for a good meeting, I'll do due diligence beforehand because it's a good use of my time. If you show up to a meeting and the tendency is nobody prepares, right? And so why should I prepare? Why should I spend the time before when we're going to have to go over everything in the beginning of the meeting anyway?
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Shall we look at the next question?
Sure.
So a lot of teams are dealing with cultures where it's easier to finger point than raise hands. What's one thing a meeting leader can do to start shifting that dynamic?
Well, actually, quite a few things come to mind. And I would say it's the meeting leader or even the meeting facilitator, right? I think it needs interventions, right? What we call interventions, where you step into and address it. So it could be kind of a light intervention of just let's ask questions when finger pointing's starting about, so what could we do, right? If somebody's like, so and so did blah, 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 it's like, okay, so what could we do, or how might we handle it? Like try to steer the group towards something that moves forward, right? I think that's one way. But I also think you could also step into it at times. You know, one of the things I've noticed in these meetings is we have a tendency to identify who's not doing what, or even finger pointing. And I'm not sure that's getting us anywhere. I think it'd be more effective if we looked at what the problem is and decided how we thought we could handle it or how we move forward. That also, though, to me brings up, you know, as a leader, leaders need to step up sometimes and have difficult conversations with people. If you've got a few people that their tendency is to finger point, then to talk to them outside of the meeting about, right, why they're doing that. Are there other ways to handle it, or what other ways they can handle it? You know, it brings in coaching so that everybody's time is well spent in the meeting and we don't end up in those situations where finger pointing happens or people are scared to go to meetings because you just hate, you know, it could be you this time.
You know, and you're right. I love that idea of feedback offline, because sometimes we, you know, I love also that you're talking about preventions, but I want to talk about two things. One is feedback offline. If it's happening with one person predominantly, talk about that, talk to that person one, you know, offline, one-on-one. It's so much more effective than starting the meeting with saying, let's not finger point when everybody knows it's that one person.
Right.
But if it is epidemic in the whole group, that thing that what you're suggesting is that prevention. How do you, if you can anticipate certain behaviors, how do you prevent the behavior at the beginning of the meeting? And that's what you're setting in place. I am going to say at the beginning, hey, I've noticed in the last few meetings, this has been happening. Do it in a way that's not like wagging the finger, but more like, hey, I'm noticing this. Let's not do that today. You know, let's try not to do that today. As an invitation, as a prevention. I like that idea a lot, Beth. I
Well,
think
and I like the tone that you're setting there as opposed to the, yeah, getting people in trouble, but it's like, let's just talk about how we've been doing this. And I think there's a different way. I also think a lot of it could come with agenda, right? The agenda that you plan. I'm not asking questions of who didn't do what. I'm asking questions of what can we do? Or, yeah, I mean, I think you could set up what you want to hear from people and be really clear about that as opposed to opening it up so that people can do more finger pointing.
that's right. I love that. We have another question here, Beth, about AI note takers. Some people are visibly pulling back, talking less. What's your take on that? Has that been your experience, Beth?
Well, actually, I have heard of that, that some people are concerned about what gets captured. So, and being able to track it back to who said it. So what I was thinking about for that is to do a little bit of agreement with the group at the beginning about how we're going to use AI, what's the value of it. I think in some meetings we could stop it for a period of time, you know, to say, I want people to be really comfortable and candid in this. And I don't want anything to hold folks back from what we need to be talking about. So for this part, we're going to stop the recording, right? And then be able to have the conversation we need to have. And then we'll just do a summary at the end of it of what comes out of the conversation. But I think making agreements with folks ahead of time about how do we want to use it? Like, what's the value of it? Given that we want to use it, what do we need to watch for or mitigate, or you know, whatever that is, whatever the group agrees to? What are some of the things you've thought of for that?
Well, you know, I think it's AI note takers are actually quite helpful and beneficial. And I think candidly, if that's a real problem, sometimes there's a bigger fish to fry there about accountability and people covering themselves and like, what's that about? So I think that might be a symptom of a larger problem of a concern in the organization around candor and being willing to say what needs to be said and the consequences of that. If that's being punished, people aren't not going to want to speak up. So to me, I would, if that was widespread in my organization, I'd be thinking about that in terms of, is there a bigger issue that we need to resolve?
That's great. That's a great idea. It makes me think about every once in a while, people will talk about uh, the kinds of things that you're talking about. People won't say the things they need to say in meetings. And so we're going to move to an anonymous way to capture information. And anytime I'm talking to somebody about that, I say that's great initially. What you want to do is eventually build up the trust so that people don't have to do it anonymously, which means thinking about how you respond either as a leader or facilitator when people bring things up, how potentially you model saying some of the things that are difficult in a group, so that it becomes safer, that whole psychological safety of people being able to say what they need to say when they're together. And that, again, that we have the right conversation, the valuable conversation.
Agree completely. Facilitating up in meetings, Beth. When leaders are in the room and you're somebody higher in the hierarchy than you, and how do you command the room when that's happening, when that dynamic is there?
Well, one of the things I always say is, I don't want to do something that's career limiting. So it's knowing who you're working with, knowing the culture of your organization. So to me, the key is the conversations that happen beforehand with that leader. I can think of some examples that people will say, a leader, like we're getting together and the leader's supposed to hear all this stuff, but the leader quickly goes to a solution they like or kind of shuts things down. So having that conversation with the leader beforehand about, do you want to hear this? Are you open to other ideas or suggestions? That might be one of our first meetings. If at the meeting they're not, or they start to shut things down. If I feel like our relationship is good, I may say things to the leader like, now, do you want to hear some more ideas? Or are you comfortable hearing more ideas? Or it looks like the group has some additional ideas. Would that be okay for them to share? So that you're subtly bringing back and reminding that leader that they did want to hear. And then, given that you talked about feedback, I think as facilitators, one of the things we can help leaders with is feedback, is to help them think through how they're showing up in some meetings. So if I'm working with a leader who continually is taking over a meeting, even though they say they want participation or doing some of those things that just aren't effective, being able to have a conversation with the leader about that, because it's not what they want and it's not how they want to show up. So to help them be more aware of what it would look like if they did it differently, or help them be aware when they've made a decision. They're not really asking for questions from people. They just want to tell people what they've decided, which is fine, but let's be clear about it. So those are some of the things that come to my mind. What about you?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing are like two key preventions. One is a conversation with the leader and saying, what do you want in this meeting? Oh. I like to ask the leader, are you influenceable or have you made the decision? If you've made the decision, the conversation, the nature of the conversation changes. It becomes not about the decision, but about implementation of the decision. So having that clarity going in helps you facilitate the right conversation with the leader, for the leader. So I would say helping the leader first monitor. If they're influenceable, then okay, then I'm going to ask you to hold back. Having that prevention conversation in advance is huge. The second thing is, okay, so if you are influenceable, do you want their input? Are we going for consensus? How much input do you want? And that also helps you clarify up front in the conversation and then manage the conversation and let the participants know, hey, folks, Mary is looking for input on this. She's going to make the call, but she's looking for your input. She's influenceable. And so it really helps you right size the conversation that happens after that. So preventions are everything, really.
So I think that's brilliant. What's the question you ask again? Are you
influenceable? Are you influenceable? And if so, sometimes I'll even say, how much? Well, I am a little open. Okay, you're a little open. Let's have that conversation then. So you say to the group, look, Mary's 95% going to do this unless you tell her something that's going to change your mind about it. Or I'm wide open, which is an entirely different conversation.
I think that's great. I think that's a great question. I'm writing that one down. I just wanted to ask you one other question we had. It says sometimes good deviations happen in meetings. How do you restructure a meeting on the spot? And what happens to the meeting you originally planned?
Yeah. A good deviation, you should go. If it makes a good deviation, what's the criteria you use to assess what's a good deviation? A
Oh, that's a
good
good question.
deviation, I thinking about it's something I hadn't thought of. It's on the critical path. If
Mm,
we don't, that's a good deviation. I hadn't thought of it. It's on the critical path. Then I'm going to make a conscious choice, either to deal with it. I'm going to deal with it now, and I'll probably put some time constraints. Let's talk about this for the next 5-10 minutes, and then we'll assess where we are with regard to it and decide what to do next. Do we, leave the entire meeting agenda aside and handle this, or do we figure out what next steps to address it in a more robust way?
nice. And we also could, in some of those moments, say, before we step into this, what do we want to get out of this 10 minutes, right? So we could set a desired outcome right in the middle of a meeting for something before we even start into it, which is more effective with the time, right? At 10 minutes, if that's what we're saying, but we'll know when we're done or not. It's a good point. I like that if it's on the critical path, then it makes more sense.
Yeah.
And we always say an agenda is something you can consciously deviate from. So the key is it's the consciousness about it and impact, right? I mean, going back to leaders, I've seen meetings or facilitated meetings where a leader will say, you know what, I think we should talk about. And before they get into it, I'll stop and say, just so that we're clear, before we start talking about that, what do we want to take away from, right? We only have, a half hour left or whatever it is, so that people can make a conscious choice about how they're going to shift. So those were the questions we got. These are great, great questions. And it's the kind of stuff as people are sitting there listening to this that come up because they're experienced and experiencing these issues. So hopefully we've helped you with some ideas.
Great. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.